Tycoon left wife for Supermodel, then found her raising his twins in luxury. Mr. Bennett, your wife is on line 1. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. A slight smile tugged at his lips as he picked up the phone. Elena, darling. Marcus, don't forget about the Children's Hospital Foundation Gala tonight. Elena's warm voice carried the gentle authority he'd grown accustomed to over their 15 years of marriage. Your speech is at 8. Wouldn't miss it for the world, he replied, his eyes drifting to the framed photo on his desk. Their wedding day, Elena radiant in white, her dark eyes sparkling with joy. How's your day been? Oh, the usual. Meeting with donors, trying to convince wealthy men to part with their money for a good cause. She chuckled, and he could picture her sitting in her home office, surrounded by the charity project files she managed with meticulous care. Marcus leaned back in his chair, gazing out at the Manhattan skyline. You're better at that than anyone I know. It's why I married you. Is that the only reason? Her teasing tone carried years of shared intimacy. Well, that and your incredible lasagna. Their easy laughter filled the line, a comfortable rhythm built over years of partnership. From the outside, they were the perfect power couple, the real estate tycoon and his philanthropist wife, their names fixtures in both the business pages and society columns. But beneath the polished surface, Marcus felt the weight of unspoken truths. The way Elena's smile would fade when she saw mothers with children in the park. The quiet nights when she thought he was sleeping, and he could hear her soft sobs after another negative pregnancy test. The growing distance between them that neither acknowledged, like a hairline crack in fine china, invisible until the moment it shatters. I should get back to work, he said finally. See you tonight? I'll be the one in the red Valentino, Elena replied. Try not to work too late? Promise. As he hung up the phone, Marcus stared at the skyline his empire had helped shape. 15 years of marriage, of building a life together, of shared dreams and silent disappointments. He had everything a man could want, almost everything. The intercom buzzed again. Mr. Bennett, the board meeting starts in 5 minutes. Thank you, Sarah, he responded, straightening his tie as he stood. Another day in the life he'd constructed so carefully, unaware that in just a few months, every foundation of that life would be shaken to its core. Little did he know that his perfectly orchestrated world was about to collide with fate in the form of a chance meeting in Milan, where destiny wore stilettos and carried a Vogue portfolio. Mrs. Bennett? Her assistant's voice broke through her reverie. The fertility clinic called. They wanted to confirm your appointment for next week. Elena's throat tightened. Cancel it, Rebecca. Just cancel all of them. But Mrs. Bennett, please. Her voice cracked slightly. I can't do another round. Not right now. After Rebecca left, Elena sank into her leather chair, her hand instinctively moving to her flat stomach. 15 years of trying, of hoping, of praying. 15 years of watching other women's bellies swell with life while hers remained stubbornly empty. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd dedicated her life to helping children, yet couldn't have any of her own. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Board meeting running late. Don't wait up. She typed back a quick, okay, love you, before setting the phone face down. These days, it seemed like there were more late meetings, more business dinners, more reasons for their paths to cross less and less. Or maybe she was just more aware of the silence in their sprawling penthouse. Standing up, Elena walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city pulse with life below. A young mother pushed a stroller across the street, and Elena felt the familiar ache in her chest. Get it together, she whispered to herself, straightening her shoulders. She had work to do, lives to change, even if they weren't the lives she dreamed of creating herself. Her computer pinged with an email from the Children's Hospital Foundation. They needed her to review the plans for the new pediatric wing, a project she'd spent months fundraising for. This was her purpose now, wasn't it? Making a difference in the lives of other people's children. As she immersed herself in work, Elena pushed down the gnawing emptiness that threatened to consume her. She was good at that, hiding her pain behind perfectly coordinated charity galas and flawless dinner parties. No one needed to know about the drawer full of negative pregnancy tests, or the nursery designs she'd secretly saved on her iPad. The intercom buzzed again. "Mrs. Bennett, the contractor for the new pediatric wing is here for your meeting." Elena took a deep breath, checked her reflection in the window, and adjusted her Chanel blazer. Time to be Elena Bennett, the philanthropist, the perfect wife, the woman who had everything, except the one thing she wanted most. "Send him in," she replied, her voice steady and professional. After all, she had a reputation to maintain, a facade to uphold. But deep inside, a storm was brewing, and soon, very soon, it would break with a force that would shatter every carefully constructed wall she'd built around her heart. Little did she know, as she prepared for another meeting, that fate was already in motion. In a few short months, her world would be turned upside down in ways she couldn't possibly imagine, and the very foundation of her perfectly curated life would crumble beneath her feet. "Mr. Bennett, what brings real estate royalty to our humble fashion show?" A journalist thrust a microphone toward him, her accent thick with Italian flair. "Business knows no boundaries," he replied smoothly, though truthfully, he wasn't entirely sure why he'd accepted the invitation. Perhaps it was the emptiness of his hotel room, or the unanswered text from Elena about another canceled fertility appointment. That's when he saw her. Victoria Blackwood emerged onto the runway like a force of nature. Long legs, cascading dark hair, and eyes that seemed to pierce through the camera flashes. But it wasn't just her beauty that caught his attention. It was the raw confidence, the untamed spirit that radiated from her every movement. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second as she passed, and Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years: possibility. Later, at the after-party, fate orchestrated their collision. Marcus was nursing a scotch at the bar when a voice like honey and smoke materialized beside him. "You looked bored during the show," Victoria said, sliding onto the adjacent bar stool. Up close, she was even more magnetic. "Not a fashion enthusiast, Mr. Bennett?" He turned, surprised by her directness. "You know who I am? I make it my business to know interesting people." She signaled the bartender. "Martini extra dirty. And please call me Victoria." "Marcus," he offered, watching as she delicately picked up her olive with manicured fingers. "So, Marcus, what really brings a New York real estate tycoon to Milan Fashion Week?" The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken implications. He could have mentioned business meetings, networking opportunities, or any number of legitimate reasons. Instead, he found himself saying, "Maybe I was looking for something different." Victoria's lips curved into a knowing smile. "Different can be dangerous. Dangerous can be exciting," he countered, surprising himself with his boldness. She leaned closer, her perfume intoxicating. "And what would your wife think about exciting?" The mention of Elena should have been like cold water, should have snapped him back to reality. Instead, it felt distant, like a story from another life. "Sometimes," Victoria continued, her voice dropping to a whisper, "the life we've built becomes a beautiful cage. Haven't you ever wondered what it would be like to break free?" Marcus stared into his scotch, watching the ice cubes dance. "Freedom comes at a price. Everything worth having does." Victoria stood, her dress shimming under the chandelier lights. "I'm having breakfast tomorrow at the rooftop restaurant. 8 a.m. Join me, if you're ready to discover what different really means." As she walked away, Marcus felt the weight of his wedding ring like never before. He pulled out his phone, saw Elena's message about a new pediatric wing donor, and felt the familiar guilt twist in his gut. But beneath the guilt was something else, a spark of excitement, of possibility, of change. He ordered another scotch, knowing that tomorrow morning would bring a decision that would alter not just his life, but the lives of everyone around him. The question wasn't whether he would go to breakfast. Deep down, he already knew the answer. The question was, could he live with the consequences? The Milan night stretched out before him, full of promise and peril. While back in New York, Elena slept alone in their perfectly appointed bedroom, unaware that her world was about to shatter into a million glittering pieces. "You're different when you're with me," Victoria whispered one evening in their suite at the Ritz Paris, her fingers tracing patterns on his chest. "It's like you come alive." Marcus stared at the ceiling, the city of lights twinkling beyond their window. "With you, I don't have to be Marcus Bennett, the CEO, the perfect husband, the man who has it all figured out." "And who are you instead?" She propped herself up on one elbow, her dark hair falling like a curtain around them. "Just me. Flawed, uncertain, free." His phone buzzed on the nightstand, Elena's name illuminating the screen. Victoria noticed his hesitation. "You haven't told her yet, have you?" "It's complicated," he sighed, letting the call go to voicemail. "The foundation, our social circles, the business connections we've built together. Life is complicated." Victoria rose from the bed, wrapping herself in silk. "But lies are exhausting. Trust me, I've lived enough of them in this industry." In New York, Elena was organizing their anniversary dinner, unaware that her husband was falling in love with another woman thousands of miles away. Her voice message played in the quiet room. "Marcus, darling, just confirming you'll be back for our anniversary next week. I've planned something special. I miss you." These business trips seemed to get longer every time. The guilt hit him like a physical force. Victoria watched his expression change, understanding flickering across her features. "You know what the worst part is?" She moved to the window, her silhouette ethereal against the Parisian skyline. "I'm not sorry. I should be, but I'm not." "What does that make me?" Marcus joined her at the window, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Human. It makes us human. Humans who are going to hurt someone who doesn't deserve it." The truth of her words hung heavy in the air. Below them, Paris continued its eternal dance of romance and passion, oblivious to the drama unfolding in one of its countless rooms. "I can't keep living two lives," Marcus finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "It's not fair to any of us." Victoria turned in his arms, her eyes searching his face. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying I want a future with you, a real one, not stolen moments and secret meetings. Your world will implode. The press will be merciless. Let it burn." He pulled her closer, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest. "Some things are worth the flames." As they stood there, embracing in the soft Parisian night, neither could have predicted just how prophetic those words would prove to be. Back in New York, Elena was about to stumble upon a stray receipt from the Ritz Paris, dated on a day when Marcus was supposed to be in Tokyo. The carefully constructed house of cards was about to collapse, and when it did, no one would emerge unscathed. The question wasn't if the truth would come out, but when and who would be left standing in the aftermath of the inevitable storm. In that moment, though, Marcus and Victoria remained wrapped in their bubble of illicit love, while thousands of miles away, Elena prepared for an anniversary celebration that would never come to pass. The wheels of fate were turning, and there was no stopping what was about to unfold. "Mrs. Bennett?" Rebecca hovered anxiously in the doorway. "Should I cancel your appointments for today?" Elena's perfectly manicured nails dug into the paper, creasing the image. "No." Her voice was eerily calm. "But get me everything you can find about Victoria Blackwood. Every magazine appearance, every runway show, every hotel sighting." Within hours, her office walls became a timeline of betrayal. Photos, receipts, flight records, all painting a picture she'd been too blind to see. Tokyo had been Paris. Singapore had been London. Business meetings had been romantic getaways. Her phone buzzed. "Marcus. Darling, my flight's delayed. I might not make it back for our anniversary." Elena's voice cut through his excuse like ice. "Or for the charity gala. Or perhaps you're too busy with your Parisian photo shoot." The line went dead silent. She could hear his breathing change. "Elena, don't." She stood, walking to the window where rain had begun to fall, matching her mood. "How long, Marcus? How long have you been lying to me? I was going to tell you." When her composure finally cracked. "After another failed fertility treatment? After watching me plan our anniversary dinner like a fool? After I'd spent 15 years building a life you were so eager to throw away? It's not that simple." It is that simple. The magazine hit the wall with a satisfying thud. You're sleeping with a woman half my age while I've been here, trying to give you a family, trying to be the perfect wife, trying to... Her voice broke, tears finally falling. I saw the hotel receipt, the one from the day you were supposed to be in Tokyo. You didn't even try to hide it well. Through the phone, she heard a door close, him moving to a private space. Elena, please, let me come home. We can talk about this. Home. She laughed bitterly. Is that what this is? Because from these pictures, it looks like you've found yourself a new home. In Paris. With her. The press doesn't understand. But I do. I understand perfectly. Elena's voice turned cold again. You know what the worst part is? I had to find out from a magazine. Our friends, our colleagues, probably the whole city knew before I did. Do you have any idea what that feels like? The silence stretched between them. 15 years of marriage crumbling in the space of a phone call. I'll have my lawyers contact you, she finally said. Don't come home, Marcus. There's nothing here for you anymore. As she ended the call, Elena caught her reflection in the window, poised, elegant, broken. Outside, New York continued its relentless pace, unaware that one of its most prominent couples was imploding. Her phone began buzzing with notifications. The story was breaking across all major news outlets. Rebecca, she called out, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. Get me James Morrison from Morrison and Associates. It's time I had a good divorce lawyer. She turned back to the wall of evidence, to the smiling faces of Marcus and Victoria, to the life she thought she knew. Tomorrow she would be strong. Tomorrow she would face the press and the pitying looks. Tomorrow she would begin rebuilding. But tonight, in the privacy of her office, Elena Bennett allowed herself to mourn the death of her marriage. While across the city, newsrooms buzzed with the biggest society scandal of the year. The perfect couple's facade had finally cracked, and the whole world was about to witness the fallout. Marcus sat in his temporary penthouse suite at the Four Seasons, watching Victoria pace the room in her silk robe. The divorce papers lay unopened on the coffee table. They're calling me a homewrecker, Victoria said, scrolling through her phone. Your company's stock dropped 12 points this morning. Let them talk, Marcus replied, loosening his tie. The board meeting had been brutal. It'll blow over. Will it? She stopped pacing, fixing him with those piercing eyes. Your ex-wife just gave an interview to Vanity Fair. It's devastating. He grabbed the magazine Victoria tossed his way. Elena's face stared back at him from the glossy pages, elegant and composed even in her pain. The headline read, Elena Bennett speaks. I lost my marriage while trying to create a family. Jesus, he muttered, scanning the article. Elena had detailed their fertility struggles, their last failed IVF attempt just weeks before he met Victoria. She'd painted a picture of dedication and betrayal that made his stomach turn. The Charity Foundation board wants to keep her and remove you as patron, Victoria added softly. And 3 major investors have pulled out of the Dubai project. The weight of consequences was finally settling in. His phone buzzed, another message from his sister. Mom's crying again. How could you do this to Elena? To all of us? I knew there would be fallout, he said, running a hand through his graying hair. But this, having second thoughts? Victoria's voice carried a hint of vulnerability she rarely showed. About us? No. He pulled her into his lap, breathing in her familiar scent. About how I handled it. Every damn day. Outside, a photographer's flash illuminated the room momentarily. Victoria flinched. I can't even walk to a casting without being mobbed, she whispered. They're calling me every name in the book. Gold digger, husband thief, home wrecker. You're stronger than their words. Am I? She stood abruptly, moving to the window. I'm 28, Marcus. My career was just peaking. Now, designers are canceling contracts. No one wants their brand associated with scandal. The reality of their choices hung heavy in the air. Marcus thought of Elena, of the life they'd built, of the children they'd never had. He thought of Victoria, young and brilliant, now tarnished by their love. His phone rang, the board chairman. "Marcus." The voice was grave. "The shareholders are calling for an emergency meeting. They're concerned about the company's image." "I built this company from nothing," Marcus snapped. "They can't push me out. They can try." After hanging up, he turned to find Victoria watching him intently. "What if we left?" she suggested suddenly. "Just disappeared for a while. Paris, maybe. Or Milan. Somewhere we can start fresh." Marcus looked around the hotel suite, their temporary haven from the storm they'd created. Everything he'd built was crumbling. His marriage, his reputation, his empire. But looking at Victoria, he felt that same electric possibility he'd experienced in Milan. "Maybe it's time," he agreed. "Time to let it all burn and build something new from the ashes." As they began to plan their escape, neither noticed the small detail Victoria had missed in her morning sickness, attributing it to stress. In her body, 2 tiny lives were already beginning to form, a secret that would soon turn their world upside down once again. The city lights twinkled beyond their window, while across town, Elena sat in their former home, reading supporter messages from thousands of women who'd been through similar betrayals. The pieces of their shattered lives were still falling, and no one knew quite where they would land. "Twins," she whispered to her still flat stomach, recalling the doctor's words from yesterday's ultrasound. 2 little lives. The irony wasn't lost on her. Elena had tried for years, and here she was, accidentally pregnant with not 1, but 2 of Marcus's children. The morning sickness she'd blamed on stress now made perfect sense. Her phone buzzed. Marcus was calling from New York, where he was fighting to maintain control of his company. She let it go to voicemail. "You've reached Victoria Blackwood. Leave a message." "Victoria, the board meeting went better than expected. I should be back in Paris by Friday. I miss you." She closed her eyes, letting his voice wash over her. How could she tell him? The man who'd lost everything, his marriage, his reputation, half his company, because of their love affair. Would these babies be seen as a blessing or the final nail in his coffin? Her agent's words from yesterday echoed in her mind. "Pregnant? Victoria? Darling, this will destroy what's left of your career. No one books a pregnant model, let alone one involved in the scandal of the decade." Standing up, she caught her reflection in the mirror. At 12 weeks, there was just the slightest curve to her stomach, invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. But soon, "Mademoiselle Blackwood?" Her housekeeper's voice came through the door. "Your car is here for the photo shoot." "Cancel it," Victoria called back. "Cancel everything for the next few days. I'm not feeling well." She walked to the bedroom window, overlooking the Seine. Paris had become their refuge, but now it felt like a gilded cage. The paparazzi still lurked outside, hoping to catch glimpses of the other woman who'd brought down one of New York's most powerful men. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a news alert. Bennett Industries stock rebounds as CEO maintains control. Below it was a photo of Marcus leaving the board meeting, looking tired but triumphant. He'd fought so hard to keep his empire, to prove he could weather this storm. How would he react to news that would surely trigger another media frenzy? Victoria's hand drifted to her stomach. "What am I going to do with you two?" she whispered. "Your father's finally starting to rebuild his life, and I'm about to complicate everything again." She walked to her closet, pushing aside designer gowns until she found an old shoebox. Inside were all the tabloid clippings about their affair, including one particularly cruel article about Elena's fertility struggles. The guilt was overwhelming. Making a decision, Victoria picked up her phone and dialed her private doctor. "Dr. Laurent? Yes, I need to arrange everything we discussed. The private clinic in Switzerland? Yes, complete confidentiality. No one can know, not even Marcus." As she hung up, tears rolled down her cheeks. She would protect these babies, and Marcus, the only way she knew how, by disappearing. Let the world think she'd abandoned him for the next wealthy target. Let them paint her as the villain. She would give these children the peaceful life they deserved, away from the scandal that would forever haunt their parents' love story. "I'm sorry, Marcus," she whispered to the empty room, packing a small bag. But sometimes love means protecting someone from the truth. In New York, Marcus celebrated his victory over the board, unaware that the woman he'd sacrificed everything for was about to vanish, taking his unborn children with her. The game of secrets and lies was far from over. It was merely entering a new, more complicated chapter. Mrs. Bennet? Dr. Mitchell paused. Elena, I wish you had come to me sooner. The condition we've discovered is completely treatable. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. Treatable? Her voice cracked. You mean, all this time? Yes, a simple procedure could have corrected the issue years ago. With your permission, I'd like to run through the details of... Elena's bitter laugh cut through the doctor's explanation. 15 years, she whispered. 15 years of trying, of failing, of watching my marriage crumble while thinking I was broken, and you're telling me it could have been fixed. She stood abruptly, walking to the window. Below, a young mother pushed a stroller, her child's laughter floating up to the third-floor office. The timing of this revelation is... Elena struggled to find the words. Almost cruel, don't you think, Dr. Mitchell? My husband is plastered across every tabloid with his pregnant supermodel. And now I learned that I could have given him children all along. Dr. Mitchell's eyes widened. Pregnant? I hadn't heard. Neither had I. Elena's reflection showed a twisted smile. Page 6 broke the news this morning. Apparently, she's been spotted at a prestigious Swiss clinic. The universe has quite the sense of humor, doesn't it? The doctor moved to stand beside her. Elena, this doesn't change your options. If you still want to have children... With whom? Elena turned, her eyes blazing. The man who couldn't wait? Who traded 15 years of marriage for a younger model who could apparently conceive over a weekend in Paris. She grabbed her designer bag, needing to escape the suffocating weight of what-ifs and could-have-beens. Mrs. Bennet, Dr. Mitchell called after her. At least take the treatment information. Your future isn't defined by your past. Elena paused at the door, accepting the folder without looking at it. Outside in the hallway, she leaned against the wall, letting the tears fall freely for the first time since the news broke. Her phone buzzed, a text from her lawyer. Victoria Blackwood spotted at Swiss fertility clinic. Press requesting comment on pregnancy rumors. How do you want to handle this? Another buzz, a news alert. Sources confirm. Bennett's model lover expecting the final twist of the knife came in the form of a photo. Victoria, glowing and beautiful, being escorted into an exclusive medical facility, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. Elena's fingers found the pendant Marcus had given her on their 5th anniversary, a tiny golden key. To unlock all our future dreams, he'd said. With trembling hands, she ripped it from her neck, letting it fall to the sterile hospital floor. Excuse me, a nurse approached. Are you all right? Elena straightened, wiping her tears with practiced elegance. No, she said honestly, but I will be. She walked out of the fertility clinic for the last time, the treatment folder clutched in her hand like a cruel joke. The New York streets buzzed with life, oblivious to her private devastation. Her phone kept buzzing with messages from friends, lawyers, and reporters, all wanting to know how she felt about Victoria's pregnancy. How did she feel? Betrayed by her body, betrayed by fate, betrayed by the years spent believing she was the problem, only to discover that a simple procedure could have given them the family they dreamed of. But as she slid into her town car, Elena felt something else stirring beneath the pain, determination. She might not have gotten her happy ending with Marcus, but perhaps there was still time to write a new story. One where she wasn't defined by what she couldn't have, but by what she could still become. Where to, Mrs. Bennet? Her driver asked. Law school admissions office, she replied, a new fire in her eyes. It's time for a change. Mademoiselle Blackwood, you're progressing beautifully, Dr. Laurent said in her soothing French accent. The twins are in perfect position. Victoria nodded, her perfectly maintained facade cracking under the pain. She'd chosen this remote clinic for its discretion, paying a fortune to ensure her privacy. No paparazzi, no headlines, no Marcus. Would you like us to try calling the father again? The nurse asked gently. No, Victoria gasped between contractions. He can't know. Her phone lay silent on the bedside table. She'd changed her number weeks ago, disappearing completely from Marcus's life. The last headline she'd seen about him showed him looking haggard, searching for her in Paris. Another contraction ripped through her body. Oh God! Push, mademoiselle. The first baby is crowning. Victoria screamed, all her model poise forgotten as she brought her first child into the world. The cry that filled the room was the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. It's a boy, Dr. Laurent announced, holding up the tiny, red-faced infant. Before Victoria could reach for him, another contraction began. The second one is coming. Minutes later, a second cry joined the first. And a girl. Congratulations, Mademoiselle Blackwood. They're perfect. The nurses cleaned and wrapped the twins, placing them in Victoria's trembling arms. She stared down at their tiny faces, seeing Marcus in every feature. The boy had his strong jaw, the girl his intense eyes. Hello, my loves, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I'm your mama. As she held them, a news alert flashed on her phone. Bennett Industries CEO still searching for missing model. Sources say he's devastated. Victoria turned away from the screen, focusing on her babies. I'm going to give you the life you deserve, she promised them. Away from the scandal, away from the headlines. Just us. Dr. Laurent approached with paperwork. Have you decided on names for the birth certificates? Victoria looked down at her son, with his father's features but her dark hair. Alexander, she said softly. Then to her daughter, who already showed signs of her mother's beauty. And Sophia. And the father's name? Dr. Laurent asked carefully. Victoria hesitated, her heart breaking all over again. Leave it blank. As the Swiss nights settled over the clinic, Victoria held her twins close, watching the stars through her window. Somewhere in New York, Marcus was probably in his office, still running his empire, still searching for her. In another part of the city, Elena was likely building her new life, unaware that the children she'd longed for had just been born to her. Replacement. Your father would love you so much, Victoria whispered to her sleeping babies. But sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes we have to protect the ones we love by letting them go. She knew the truth would come out eventually. Secrets this big always did. But for now, in this peaceful mountain clinic, she was just a mother with her newborns, creating their own little world away from the chaos they'd left behind. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, covering everything in a clean, white blanket. Much like the fresh start Victoria was determined to give her children, no matter the cost to her own heart. Mama, look! Sophia held up a crayon drawing. It's us at the park. Victoria smiled, kneeling to admire the artwork. It's beautiful, darling. Why don't you and Alex get ready for bed? I'll be there to read a story soon. As the children scampered off, Victoria's gaze drifted to the stack of magazines on her coffee table. The headline glared back at her. Bennett Industries expands to Dubai. CEO Marcus Bennett rebuilds empire post-scandal. She traced Marcus's face on the cover, noting the new lines around his eyes, the touch of gray at his temples. 3 years had passed, but the ache in her heart remained. Her phone buzzed, a text from her agent. Vogue wants you for their comeback issue. Are you ready to return to the spotlight? Victoria sighed, looking around the luxurious apartment she'd created for her children. Designer furniture mixed with scattered toys, a testament to the life she'd built away from prying eyes. Her modeling earnings and smart investments had ensured they wanted for nothing, but the price had been steep, complete anonymity. Mama, Alex called from the bedroom. Story time. As she walked to the children's room, Victoria caught her reflection in a mirror. At 31, she was still stunningly beautiful, but there was a maturity in her eyes that hadn't been there before. The carefree supermodel was gone, replaced by a fiercely protective mother. She settled into the chair between the twins' beds, opening their favorite book. Once Upon a Time. As she read, Victoria couldn't help but see Marcus in every feature of her children. Alex had his determined chin, Sophia his expressive eyes. How long could she keep them hidden from the world? From their father? The story finished. She tucked them in, kissing their foreheads. Sweet dreams, my loves. Back in the living room, Victoria poured herself a glass of wine, staring out at the Paris skyline. Her phone buzzed again, this time an email notification. From Elena Bennett. Subject: we need to talk. Victoria's hand shook as she opened the message. Victoria, I hope this email finds you well. It's taken me 3 years to write this, but I think it's time we had an honest conversation. About Marcus. About the children I suspect you're raising alone. I'm in Paris for a conference next week. Meet me at Café de Flore on Tuesday at 2 p.m. Just us. No lawyers, no press. It's time to end this chapter, for all our sakes. Elena. Victoria sank onto the couch, her mind racing. How had Elena found out? What did she want? And most terrifyingly, would this be the moment her carefully constructed world came crashing down? She glanced at the children's bedroom door, then back at her phone. With trembling fingers, she typed her response, "I'll be there." As she hit send, Victoria felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. The past she'd tried so hard to outrun was finally catching up. In a week's time, she'd face the woman whose life she'd upended, all while trying to protect the children who had become her entire world. The Parisian night stretched out before her, filled with possibility and dread in equal measure. Whatever happened at that cafe would change everything. For her, for the twins, for Marcus, and for Elena. The final act of their tangled drama was about to begin, and Victoria realized with a start that she was both terrified and relieved. "Mr. Bennett?" His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Your 3 o'clock is here." Marcus straightened his tie, pushing thoughts of Victoria to the back of his mind. "Send them in." As he turned to greet his visitor, a flash of dark hair and piercing eyes made his heart skip a beat. For a moment he thought, but no, it was just another business associate, another deal to be made. The meeting dragged on, talk of profit margins and market expansions blurring together. Marcus nodded at the right moments, signed where indicated, but his mind was elsewhere. "Excellent work, Mr. Bennett," the associate said, shaking his hand. Bennett Industries is truly rising from the ashes. As the door closed behind his visitor, Marcus slumped into his chair. Rising from the ashes. At what cost? His phone buzzed, a message from his private investigator. Possible lead on VB in Paris. Unconfirmed sighting near Jardin des Tuileries. Permission to pursue. Marcus's hand hovered over the phone. It had been 3 years of dead ends, false hopes, and crushing disappointments. Each lead felt like reopening a wound that refused to heal. "Mr. Bennett?" His assistant again. "Your ex-wife is on line 1. She says it's urgent." Marcus froze. Elena never called. Not since the divorce. What could be so important? He picked up the phone, his voice hoarse. "Elena!" "Marcus." Her tone was clipped, professional. "I'm calling to inform you that I'm meeting with Victoria next week in Paris." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "What? How did you find her?" "That's not important. What matters is that there are things you need to know. Things that will affect your life significantly." Marcus gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles turning white. "Elena, please. If you know where she is. This isn't about you and me anymore, Marcus. It's about the children." "Children." The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. "I think you know exactly what I mean." Elena's voice softened slightly. "Be in Paris next week. Tuesday, 3 p.m. I'll text you the location after I meet with her." The line went dead, leaving Marcus reeling. "Children." The word echoed in his mind, filling him with a mixture of hope, fear, and gut-wrenching guilt. He turned back to the Dubai skyline, the empire he'd rebuilt suddenly feeling hollow. All the success, all the power, what did it matter if... His hand shook as he picked up his phone again, dialing his assistant. "Cancel all my appointments for next week, and book me on the next flight to Paris." As he ended the call, Marcus caught his reflection in the window. The man staring back at him looked older, wearier than he remembered. The past 3 years had taken their toll, etching lines of worry and regret into his face. But now, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was a glimmer of something else in his eyes. Hope and terror. He'd sacrificed everything for Victoria once before. His marriage, his reputation, nearly his company. Now, faced with the possibility of not just finding her, but discovering he was a father, Marcus Bennett, the man who had rebuilt an empire from scandal, felt utterly unprepared for what awaited him in Paris. As the sun set over Dubai, casting long shadows across his office, he realized that the true reckoning was yet to come. The game had changed, and the stakes were higher than he could have ever imagined. In a week's time, the fragile new life he'd constructed would either solidify or shatter completely. And somewhere in Paris, 2 children who bore his features played innocently, unaware that their world was about to be turned upside down. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Harriet Stevenson," the bailiff announced. Elena stood, her heart pounding. This wasn't just another case. This was her calling, her redemption, her transformation made manifest. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady and clear. "I stand before you today representing Sarah Collins, a woman who, like so many others, has been silenced by a system that favors power over justice." As she delivered her opening statement, Elena felt a surge of purpose. The journey from betrayed wife to crusading attorney hadn't been easy, but every late night studying, every tear shed over casebooks, had led her here. "Ms. Bennett," Judge Stevenson interrupted, "I understand this is your first major case since passing the bar. Are you certain you're prepared for the complexity of this litigation?" Elena met the judge's gaze unflinchingly. "Your Honor, I've spent the last 3 years preparing not just for this case, but for this moment. To stand up for those who have been wronged, to give voice to the voiceless. I assure you, I am more than prepared." As she continued her argument, Elena caught sight of her client, Sarah, sitting nervously at the plaintiff's table. A woman who, like her, had been betrayed by a powerful man who thought he was above the law. But unlike Elena's story, this one would have a different ending. The opposing counsel, a shark from a top-tier firm, smirked as he stood to object. "Your Honor, Ms. Bennett's emotional appeal has no place in this courtroom. We're here to discuss facts, not feelings." Elena's eyes narrowed. She'd anticipated this, prepared for it. "Counselor," she replied coolly, "if you believe that the systematic abuse of power and the emotional toll it takes on its victims are not relevant facts, perhaps you're in the wrong profession." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Stevenson raised an eyebrow, intrigued. As the day wore on, Elena felt herself coming alive in a way she never had before. This wasn't just about winning a case. It was about reclaiming her narrative, about turning her pain into purpose. During a recess, her phone buzzed. A text from her investigator confirmed sighting a VB in Paris, with children, details to follow. Elena's hand trembled slightly as she read the message. Victoria, the children, Marcus, the life she thought she'd left behind was suddenly rushing back to the forefront. "Ms. Bennett," Sarah's timid voice broke through her thoughts. Are we doing okay?" Elena looked at her client, saw the fear and hope mingling in her eyes, and made a decision. The past could wait. Right now, there was justice to be served. "We're doing more than okay, Sarah," she said, squeezing the woman's hand. "We're about to make history." As they re-entered the courtroom, Elena felt a clarity she'd never experienced before. The path ahead was challenging, filled with both professional battles and personal reckonings. But for the first time in years, she felt truly, unequivocally alive. The bailiff called the court back to order, and Elena stood, ready to continue her argument. But this time it wasn't just for Sarah, or even for herself. It was for every woman who'd ever been told her story didn't matter, who'd ever been cast aside for a younger model, who'd ever been made to feel that her worth was tied to someone else's desires. "Your Honor," she began, her voice ringing with conviction, "let me tell you about the real cost of power unchecked." As she spoke, Elena knew that whatever awaited her in Paris, whatever confrontation was coming with Victoria and Marcus, she was ready. She had found her voice, her purpose, her power. And nothing, not ex-husbands, not supermodels, not even the ghosts of her past, could take that away from her now. Elena's breath caught in her throat. 3 years had passed, but Victoria was still strikingly beautiful, albeit with a softer edge that motherhood had bestowed upon her. As Elena approached, she noticed the subtle protective curve of Victoria's arm, as if shielding an invisible child. "Hello, Victoria," Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt. Victoria looked up, her eyes widening with recognition and a flicker of fear. "Elena, I didn't think you'd actually come. I said I would." Elena sat down, maintaining a careful distance. "We have a lot to discuss." For a moment, neither spoke. The sound of children playing nearby filled the air, a poignant backdrop to their conversation. "How did you find me?" Victoria finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elena allowed herself a small smile. "I'm a lawyer now. Finding people is part of the job." Victoria nodded, her gaze drifting to a nearby playground. Elena followed her line of sight, her heart skipping a beat as she spotted 2 children, a boy and a girl, about 3 years old, with familiar features that made her chest tighten. "They're beautiful," Elena said softly. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "They're everything to me, everything I've done. It was all for them." Elena felt a complex mix of emotions surge through her: anger, sadness, and surprisingly, a tinge of empathy. "Why didn't you tell him, Victoria? Why disappear?" Victoria turned to face her, vulnerability etched across her face. "I was scared. Of the scandal, of the media frenzy, of..." She paused. "Of not being enough. Marcus had already lost so much because of me. I couldn't bear the thought of him losing his company too." Elena's carefully constructed composure wavered. "So you made the decision for all of us. Do you have any idea what that did to him? To me? I'm sorry," Victoria whispered, a tear sliding down her cheek. "I know it doesn't change anything, but I truly am sorry." The children's laughter echoed across the garden, a stark contrast to the heavy silence between the 2 women. "What do you want, Elena?" Victoria finally asked. "Why are you really here?" Elena took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Because it's time for the truth, Victoria. All of it. Marcus deserves to know about his children, and they deserve to know their father." Victoria's eyes widened in panic. "No, you can't. Please, Elena. They have a good life here, away from all the chaos and judgment." "And what about Marcus?" Elena countered, surprised by the intensity of her own emotions. "The man I was married to for 15 years, he would want to know his children. He deserves that chance." Victoria's shoulders sagged, the weight of her secrets finally taking their toll. What if he rejects them? What if he hates me for keeping this from him?" Elena reached out, surprising herself by taking Victoria's hand. "I don't know what will happen, but I do know that living with lies is no way to raise a family. Trust me on that." As if on cue, the little boy from the playground ran up to them, his sister trailing behind. "Mama, look what we found." Victoria quickly wiped her tears, plastering on a smile. "That's wonderful, darling. Why don't you and Sophia go play for a few more minutes?" As the children ran off, Elena felt her heart constrict. They were so clearly Marcus's, his eyes, his smile, even the determined set of their little jaws. "He's coming to Paris," Elena said quietly. "Next week. I think it's time you 2 talked." Victoria's eyes filled with fear and something else. "Hope? I don't know if I can face him." Elena stood, smoothing her skirt. "You owe it to those children, Victoria, and to yourself. Enough running." As she turned to leave, Victoria called out, "Elena, thank you for not hating me. I'm not sure I deserve it." Elena paused, looking back at the woman who had once been her nemesis. "Hate is exhausting, Victoria, and it doesn't change the past. But what we do next, that can change the future." Walking away, Elena felt a strange mix of closure and anticipation. The confrontation she'd imagined for years hadn't gone as expected, but it had opened a door to possibilities she never considered. As she hailed a taxi, her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. Landed in Paris. Where do I meet you? Elena took a deep breath, typing her response. Le Café Marley, tomorrow at noon. There's someone you need to see. The taxi pulled away from the curb, leaving behind the garden where two innocent children played. Unaware that their world was about to change forever, Elena gazed out the window, realizing that the story she thought had ended years ago was only just beginning its most important chapter. Victoria's hands trembled as she replied, "With my sister. They don't know anything yet." She stared at her reflection in the mirror, hardly recognizing the woman looking back at her. Gone was the carefree supermodel, replaced by a mother carrying the weight of life-altering secrets. She smoothed her blouse, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the Parisian morning. The walk to the Louvre felt like a dream. Tourists milled about, snapping photos and laughing, oblivious to the drama unfolding in their midst. As Victoria approached Le Café Marley, she spotted them, Elena and Marcus, sitting at a corner table, an untouched espresso in front of each. Time seemed to slow as Marcus looked up and their eyes met. The years melted away, and for a moment, they were back in Milan, two souls drawn together by an irresistible force. Victoria's legs felt like lead as she approached the table. "Hello, Marcus." "Elena." Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the stone floor. "Victoria," he breathed, his voice a mix of relief, anger, and something else, longing. Elena nodded, her face a carefully composed mask. "Sit, please. We have much to discuss." As Victoria took her seat, a waiter approached. "Un café s'il vous plaît," she managed, her throat dry. Silence fell over the table, heavy with unspoken words and years of pent-up emotions. Finally, Marcus broke the tension. "Why?" The single word carried the weight of 1,000 sleepless nights, countless searches, and endless heartache. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "I was scared, Marcus, terrified, of the scandal of ruining your life even more than I already had. And then, when I found out about the babies..." "Babies?" Marcus's voice cracked. Elena reached out, placing a steadying hand on his arm. Victoria nodded, pulling out her phone. With shaking hands, she pulled up a photo and slid it across the table. "Alexander and Sophia. They're 3 now." Marcus stared at the image, his face a whirlwind of emotions. They're beautiful," he whispered, tracing their faces with his finger. "They have your smile. And your eyes," Victoria said softly. "Your determination, too. Alex is already trying to negotiate his bedtime." A choked laugh escaped Marcus, somewhere between a sob and a chuckle. "I have children," he said, as if testing the words. "I'm a father." Elena watched the exchange, her own eyes glistening. "They deserve to know you, Marcus. And you deserve to know them." Victoria looked at Elena, surprise and gratitude washing over her. "I'm so sorry," she said, addressing them both. "I thought I was protecting everyone, but I was a coward." Marcus reached across the table, taking Victoria's hand. The touch sent electricity through both of them. "We all made mistakes," he said, "but this is a chance to make things right." As they sat there, 3 people whose lives had been irrevocably intertwined, a commotion near the Louvre pyramid caught their attention. A little boy's voice carried across the courtyard. "Mama! Mama! Look!" Victoria's head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. There, running towards them, were Alexander and Sophia, her sister trailing behind with an apologetic look. "I'm so sorry," her sister called out. "They insisted on surprising you at work." Time seemed to stand still as the children approached. Marcus stood slowly, his eyes never leaving the 2 small figures racing towards them. Victoria looked at him, then at Elena, fear and hope battling in her eyes. "Marcus, But before she could finish, Alexander and Sophia were upon them, launching themselves into Victoria's arms. "Mama, we found you." As Victoria hugged her children, she felt Marcus's gaze heavy upon them. Slowly, she turned the twins to face him. "Alexander, Sophia," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "There's someone very special I'd like you to meet." Marcus knelt down, bringing himself to eye level with his children. "Hello," he said softly, his voice filled with wonder. Alexander, bold as ever, stepped forward. "You look like the man in Mama's secret picture, the one she cries over sometimes." A heavy silence fell over the group. The moment of truth had arrived, unplanned and raw. Victoria looked at Marcus, then at Elena, searching for guidance, for strength. Elena nodded almost imperceptibly, a silent encouragement. This was it, the moment that would change all their lives forever. Victoria took a deep breath, her heart pounding. "Darlings," she said, drawing her children close. "This is your father." The words hung in the air, charged with possibility and the weight of years of secrets. As Marcus reached out a trembling hand towards his children, the world around them seemed to fade away. In that moment, beneath the shadow of the Louvre, a new chapter was beginning, one that would redefine the meaning of family, forgiveness, and love. A soft knock at the door broke his reverie. "Come in," he called, his voice hoarse with emotion. Victoria entered, hesitant and vulnerable in a way he'd never seen her before. Gone was the confident supermodel. In her place stood a mother, weary from years of secrets. "They're asleep," she said softly, closing the door behind her. Sophia asked if you'd read her a bedtime story tomorrow. Marcus turned, his eyes glistening. "I'd like that," he whispered. "I'd like that very much." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them, years of unspoken words and buried feelings rising to the surface. "Why, Victoria?" Marcus finally asked, setting down his untouched drink. "Why didn't you tell me? I had a right to know." Victoria sank onto the plush sofa, her shoulders sagging. "I was terrified, Marcus. The scandal, the media frenzy. It was all too much. And then when I found out I was pregnant." She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "I couldn't bear the thought of you losing everything because of me. Your company, your reputation. So you made the decision for me?" Marcus said, his voice tight with anger and pain. "You took away my chance to be a father from the beginning." "I know," Victoria whispered, "and I'll regret that decision for the rest of my life. But Marcus, you have to understand, I was trying to protect them, to give them a normal life, away from the chaos." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every movement. "And what about me, Victoria? Did you ever think about what it would do to me, not knowing my own children?" Victoria stood, closing the distance between them. "Every day," she said, her voice breaking. "Every single day, I thought about you, about what I'd taken from you. But I was too scared, too ashamed to face you." Their eyes met, a maelstrom of emotions passing between them: anger, regret, longing, and something deeper, something that had never truly faded despite the years and distance. "I saw you, you know," Marcus said softly. "In every business trip, every crowded street. I'd catch a glimpse of dark hair or hear a laugh that sounded like yours, and my heart would stop. I never stopped looking for you, Victoria." Victoria reached out, her hand hovering just inches from his face. "And I never stopped loving you," she confessed, her words barely above a whisper. The admission hung in the air between them, charged with possibility and the weight of their shared history. Marcus closed his eyes, leaning ever so slightly into her touch. "Where do we go from here?" he asked, vulnerability evident in his voice. "How do we move forward?" "I don't know," Victoria admitted. "But I do know that Alexander and Sophia deserve to have their father in their lives. And you deserve to be the amazing dad I know you can be." Marcus opened his eyes, meeting Victoria's gaze. "And us?" he asked, the question laden with unspoken hope and fear. Before Victoria could respond, a soft knock interrupted them. Elena's voice came through the door. "Marcus? Victoria? We need to talk. There's been a development. The tension in the room shifted, concern replacing the charged emotional atmosphere. Marcus and Victoria exchanged a look, years of unresolved feelings pushed aside in the face of this new unknown. As Marcus moved to open the door, Victoria's hand on his arm stopped him. "Whatever happens," she said softly, "we face it together, for the children." Marcus nodded, squeezing her hand gently. "Together," he agreed. With a deep breath, he opened the door to face Elena and whatever news she brought. The night stretched out before them, full of uncertainty and the promise of change. Whatever came next would reshape not just their lives, but the lives of two innocent children who had no idea of the storm brewing around them. As Elena stepped into the room, her face grave with unspoken news, Marcus and Victoria stood side by side, ready to face whatever came next as parents, as former lovers, and as two people navigating the complex landscape of a love that had never truly died. "What is it, Elena?" Marcus asked, his voice tinged with apprehension. Elena took a deep breath, her lawyer's composure momentarily slipping. "The press found out. About the children, about all of it. It's going to break tomorrow morning." Victoria gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "How? We were so careful." "It doesn't matter how," Elena said, her tone softening. "What matters is how we handle it from here." Marcus paced the room, his mind racing. "We need to get ahead of this. Control the narrative before it spirals out of control." Victoria sank onto the sofa, her face pale. "The children, they don't know anything about this, about who their father really is, about our past. How do we protect them from this storm?" Elena sat beside her, surprising both Victoria and Marcus with her gentle touch on Victoria's arm. "We face it together. All of us." Marcus stopped pacing, turning to face the two women who had shaped his life so profoundly. "You're right, but how? The media will be relentless. They'll paint Victoria as the villain, me as the fool, and me as the scorned ex-wife," Elena added, a wry smile on her face. "But we're more than their labels. We're parents, we're professionals, we're human beings who've made mistakes and are trying to do right by those children." Victoria looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. "I never wanted this for them. I just wanted to give them a normal life." Marcus knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "I know, but maybe it's time we stopped hiding. Time we showed the world that family, that love, it's complicated. It's messy, but it's real." Elena watched the exchange, a mix of emotions playing across her face. "I have an idea," she said slowly, "but it's risky. Could change everything." Both Marcus and Victoria turned to her, curiosity and trepidation in their eyes. "What if we controlled the narrative by telling our story ourselves?" Elena proposed. "All of us together. No spin, no PR teams. Just the truth, in all its complicated glory." Marcus stood, running a hand through his hair. "You mean go public? Voluntarily?" Victoria shook her head, panic rising in her voice. "No, we can't. The children will be protected," Elena assured her. "We'll do it on our terms. Set boundaries. But think about it. If we come forward together, united, it takes the power away from the tabloids. We become human beings, not caricatures." The room fell silent as the weight of the decision hung in the air. Marcus moved to the window, staring out at the Paris skyline. "It could work," he said slowly. "But it's not just our lives we're exposing. It's Alexander and Sophia's too." Victoria stood, joining him at the window. "They deserve the truth. A chance at a real family, however unconventional it might be." Elena watched them, a bittersweet smile on her face. "So what do we do?" Marcus turned, looking at both women. In that moment, he saw not his ex-wife and his former lover, but two incredibly strong, complex women who had shaped his life in ways he was only beginning to understand. "We tell our story," he said firmly, "together, for the children, for ourselves, and for anyone who's ever felt trapped by the expectations of others." Victoria nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Together," she echoed. Elena stood, joining them, Then let's do this right. We have until morning to prepare, to decide what we want the world to know and what remains ours. As the three of them began to plan, the Paris night stretched out before them, full of possibility and fear in equal measure. Tomorrow, the world would wake to a story of love, betrayal, forgiveness, and family that defied all conventional boundaries. In a room down the hall, Alexander and Sophia slept peacefully, unaware that their world was about to change forever. But as Marcus, Victoria, and Elena worked through the night, crafting a narrative of truth and redemption, one thing became clear: whatever came next, these children would face it surrounded by more love and support than they could have ever imagined. The dawn was breaking over Paris as they finished, each of them exhausted but resolute. As they looked at each other, a silent understanding passed between them. This was more than damage control. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one they would write together. "It's time," Elena said softly, entering the room with a tablet in hand. The stories breaking across all major news outlets. Victoria joined them, her face pale but resolute. "How bad is it?" Elena handed her the tablet, and Victoria's breath caught as she read the headlines. Bennett heir scandal. Secret love child revealed. Supermodel's hidden family. Victoria Blackwood's 3-year deception. Betrayed twice. Elena Bennett's ex-husband's shocking double life. Marcus wrapped an arm around Victoria's shoulders, steadying her. "Remember, we're in control now. We tell our story, our way." A soft knock at the door made them all turn. It was Marcus's sister, Catherine, with Alexander and Sophia. The children's eyes were wide with confusion and a hint of excitement at the unusual morning activity. "Mama, why are there so many people outside?" Sophia asked, clutching her favorite stuffed animal. Victoria knelt down, gathering both children in her arms. "Darlings, remember how we talked about your daddy last night? Well, a lot of people are very excited to know about our family. But I need you to be brave for me, okay?" Alexander, ever the protector, stood a little straighter. "We'll be brave, Mama. Promise." Marcus felt his heart swell with pride and fear. He joined Victoria, kneeling beside his children. "No matter what happens today, I want you both to know how much I love you, how much we all love you." Elena watched the scene, a complex mix of emotions playing across her face. She'd spent years hating Victoria, resenting Marcus, but seeing them with the children, something had shifted. "The car's ready," Catherine said softly. "Are you sure about this?" Marcus stood, helping Victoria to her feet. He looked at Elena, then back at his sister. "We're sure. It's time to face the music." As they made their way through the hotel lobby, the noise from outside grew louder. Victoria clutched the children close, while Marcus and Elena flanked them protectively. Just before they reached the doors, Elena stopped them. "Wait," she said, her voice thick with emotion. I want you all to know, I'm proud of us, for doing this, for putting the children first." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "Elena, But Elena shook her head, cutting her off. "No more apologies. We're in this together now." Marcus looked at both women, marveling at the strength and grace they'd shown. "Ready?" They nodded, and with a deep breath, Marcus pushed open the doors. The cacophony of shouted questions and camera clicks was overwhelming. Alexander buried his face in Victoria's leg while Sophia, ever curious, peeked out from behind her mother. "Mr. Bennett, is it true you have secret children?" "Victoria, how could you keep this from the world?" "Elena, how do you feel about your ex-husband's new family?" Marcus raised his hands, and to everyone's surprise, the crowd quieted slightly. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady. "We understand there are many questions, and we're here to answer them. But first, I want to introduce you to the most important people in my life." He gestured to Alexander and Sophia, who stepped forward shyly. "These are my children, Alexander and Sophia. And this," he said, taking Victoria's hand, "is their mother, Victoria, the woman I love." A fresh wave of questions erupted, but Marcus continued. "And this," he said, reaching for Elena's hand. Is Elena, not just my ex-wife, but a dear friend and an incredible woman who has shown more grace and forgiveness than any of us deserve. The flashes intensified as the unlikely trio stood united, the children between them. Our story is complicated, Victoria said, her voice gaining strength. It's messy and imperfect, but it's ours. Elena stepped forward. We're not here to sensationalize or to ask for your approval. We're here because these children deserve the truth, and because sometimes family looks different than what you might expect. As they began to tell their story, the world watching with bated breath, Marcus felt a strange sense of peace wash over him. This wasn't the life he'd planned, not by a long shot. But looking at Victoria, at his children, and at Elena, he realized it was exactly the life he was meant to have. The road ahead would be challenging. There would be critics, naysayers, and those who would never understand. But in that moment, standing before the world's media, Marcus Bennett knew one thing for certain. They would face it all together, as the unconventional but unbreakable family they had become. Inside, the sound of laughter drifted through the open doors. Victoria was in the kitchen with the twins, their giggles a melodic counterpoint to the city's constant hum. It was a sound Marcus was still getting used to, the joyful noise of a family he never knew he had. Penny, for your thoughts? Elena's voice broke through his reverie as she joined him on the balcony, 2 glasses of wine in hand. Marcus accepted the offered glass with a grateful smile, just marveling at how much has changed, how much we've all changed. Elena nodded, her gaze drifting to the skyline. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be here, co-parenting with my ex-husband and the woman he left me for, she shook her head, a wry smile playing on her lips. Elena, Marcus began, but she cut him off with a gentle hand on his arm. No more apologies, remember? We're past that now. Her eyes softened as she looked at him. The kids adore you, you know. Sophia won't stop talking about how you're going to teach her to play chess. Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. They're incredible. I can't help feeling like I've missed so much. Then don't miss any more, Elena said simply. Be there for them now. That's all that matters. Their conversation was interrupted by Victoria's appearance at the balcony doors, flour dusting her cheek and a bemused expression on her face. I could use some help in here, she said, trying to sound exasperated but failing to hide her smile. Your son has decided that cookie dough is better used as hair gel. Marcus couldn't help but laugh, the normalcy of the moment striking him. I'll be right there, he said, setting down his wine glass. As he moved to go inside, Victoria caught his arm, her eyes searching his face. Are you okay? I know this is all still new. Marcus looked at her, then back at Elena, who was politely averting her gaze. In that moment, he was struck by the incredible strength of both women, by the family they were all forging together against all odds. I'm more than okay, he said softly, pulling Victoria close and pressing a kiss to her forehead. I'm home. Inside, Alexander's voice called out, Dad, come see what I made. The word Dad still sent a thrill through Marcus. He gave Victoria's hand a squeeze before heading inside, Elena following close behind. The scene that greeted them in the kitchen was one of delightful chaos. Alexander, true to Victoria's word, had cookie dough smeared through his hair. Sophia was meticulously arranging chocolate chips on her cookies in perfect geometric patterns. And amidst it all, Catherine, Marcus's sister, was attempting to salvage what was left of the cookie dough. Well, Marcus said, trying to sound stern but failing miserably. What do we have here? Alexander looked up, his face splitting into a wide grin. I'm a cookie monster, Dad. See? As Marcus scooped up his son, playfully scolding him while secretly delighting in the mess, he caught sight of Elena. She was watching the scene with a mix of emotions playing across her face. A tinge of sadness? Yes, but also genuine warmth and even a hint of amusement. Victoria noticed too. She moved to Elena's side, hesitantly placing a hand on her arm. Thank you, she said softly, for everything, for being here, for being so incredible with the kids. I know this can't be easy for you. Elena was quiet for a moment, her gaze fixed on Marcus and the children. You know, she finally said, I spent so long being angry, at Marcus, at you, at the world. But seeing this, she gestured to the scene before them. How can I be angry at something that brings so much joy? Victoria's eyes welled with tears. But Elena shook her head, a small smile on her face. We're family now, all of us. It's not conventional. It's not what any of us planned, but it's ours. As if to punctuate her words, Sophia piped up, Aunt Elena, come see my cookie designs. Elena laughed, genuinely and without reservation. Duty calls, she said to Victoria. Before joining Sophia at the counter, Marcus watched the scene unfold, his heart full to bursting. This wasn't the life he'd imagined, not by a long shot. It was messy and complicated and utterly imperfect. But as he stood there, surrounded by laughter and love, flour dust in the air and the smell of cookies filling the kitchen, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. It was better than anything he could have ever dreamed. The night stretched out before them, full of promise and possibility. There would be challenges ahead, no doubt. The world wasn't always kind to families that defied convention. But in that moment, in the warm glow of the kitchen, Marcus knew they could face anything together. Victoria appeared beside him, squeezing his hand reassuringly. Ready? She asked, her eyes reflecting his own nervousness. Before Marcus could respond, a familiar voice called out, There you two are. I was beginning to think you'd gotten lost. They turned to see Elena approaching, a stack of folders tucked under her arm. She'd volunteered to help organize the event, throwing herself into school activities with the same passion she brought to her legal career. Sorry we're late, Marcus said, running a hand through his hair. I had a last-minute board call that ran over. Elena nodded understandingly. Well, you're here now. That's what matters. She hesitated for a moment before adding, Alex has been talking about this all week. He's so excited for you to see his classroom. Marcus felt a lump form in his throat. The thought of his son eagerly anticipating his presence was still overwhelming at times. As they walked into the school, the whispers and stares began. Despite the months that had passed since their public revelation, their unconventional family still drew attention. Mrs. Hartley, Elena greeted the principal warmly. This is Marcus Bennett, Alexander's father. The principal's eyes widened slightly, but to her credit, she recovered quickly. Of course, welcome, Mr. Bennett. Alexander is a wonderful student. He speaks of you often. Marcus felt a surge of pride, tempered with a pang of regret for the years he'd missed. Thank you. I'm looking forward to seeing his work. As they made their way to Alexander's classroom, Victoria whispered, Are you okay? We can take a moment if you need. But Marcus shook his head, squaring his shoulders. No, I'm ready. Let's do this. The classroom door swung open, and suddenly they were surrounded by the controlled chaos of 24 8-year-olds and their parents. Alexander's face lit up when he spotted them. Dad, Mom, Aunt Elena, you're all here, he exclaimed, rushing over to hug each of them in turn. Marcus knelt down, his eyes level with his son's. We wouldn't miss it for the world, buddy. Now, show me what you've been working on. As Alexander eagerly led them around the classroom, pointing out his artwork and science projects, Marcus felt a complex swirl of emotions. Joy at seeing his son's accomplishments, sadness for the milestones he'd missed, and an overwhelming sense of gratitude for this second chance. He caught Victoria's eye across the room, where she was chatting with another parent. She gave him a soft smile, one that still made his heart skip a beat after all these years. Elena appeared at his side, her voice low. You're doing great, you know. He adores you. Marcus turned to her, struck once again by her grace in this situation. Elena, I don't know how you do it, how you can be so incredible about all of this. She was quiet for a moment, watching Alexander proudly show off his solar system model to a group of classmates. It wasn't easy at first, she admitted, but seeing him happy, seeing how much you both love him, It helps. And, she added with a small smile, being Aunt Elena has its perks. I get to be the fun one who sneaks him extra dessert. Their conversation was interrupted by Alexander's teacher, Mr. Collins, approaching with a slightly uncomfortable expression. Mr. Bennett, Ms. Blackwood, Ms. Bennett, could I have a word? The three adults exchanged glances before following him to a quiet corner of the classroom. Is everything all right? Victoria asked, concern etching her features. Mr. Collins hesitated before speaking. Alexander is a bright, wonderful child, but lately he's been struggling with some of the attention from his classmates. Questions about his family situation. Marcus felt his stomach drop. This was exactly what they'd feared, their choices affecting their children's lives. What kind of questions? Elena asked, her lawyer's instincts kicking in. Well, Mr. Collins said carefully, some of the children have been repeating things they've heard at home about your unique family arrangement. Victoria's hand found Marcus's, gripping it tightly. Has Alexander said anything to you about this? She asked. Mr. Collins nodded. He's confused and a bit upset. I thought you should know, so we can work together to support him. As the teacher continued speaking, outlining potential strategies and support systems, Marcus found his gaze drawn back to Alexander. His son was laughing with a group of friends, seemingly carefree. But now, watching closely, Marcus could see the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes occasionally darted around the room as if checking for potential threats. In that moment, the full weight of their choices settled on Marcus's shoulders. They had created this beautiful, complicated family out of love and forgiveness. But now, faced with the reality of how it affected their children, he realized their journey was far from over. As Parents' Day continued around them, Marcus, Victoria, and Elena huddled together, united in their determination to protect and support Alexander. The path ahead would be challenging, but as they stood there, watching their son navigate his world with resilience and joy, they knew one thing for certain. It's been hours, Marcus muttered, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Why haven't we heard anything? Victoria reached out, grasping his hand as he passed. The doctors said it might take time. Sophia's strong. She'll pull through this. The words hung in the air, a desperate prayer none of them quite believed. Just 24 hours ago, their world had been normal. Then came the frantic call from Sophia's school. A sudden collapse, an ambulance, and now this interminable wait. Elena turned from the window, her eyes rimmed with red. I called Catherine. She's on her way with Alexander. Marcus nodded, grateful for his sister's support. How do we explain this to him? He's only 8. He shouldn't have to deal with... His voice trailed off, unable to finish the thought. The possibility of losing Sophia was too horrific to contemplate. A nurse appeared in the doorway, her face unreadable. Mr. and Mrs. Bennett. Victoria stood quickly, correcting the assumption without missing a beat. I'm Sophia's mother, Victoria Blackwood. This is her father, Marcus Bennett, and her aunt, Elena Bennett. The nurse nodded, unfazed by the unconventional family dynamic. The doctor would like to speak with you, if you'll follow me. The walk to the consultation room felt like miles. Marcus's mind raced with worst-case scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. Victoria's hand found his, squeezing tightly, while Elena walked close behind, a steadying presence. Dr. Patel greeted them with a grave expression that did nothing to calm their fears. Please sit down, she said, gesturing to the chairs. Just tell us, Marcus said, his voice hoarse. Is our daughter going to be okay? Dr. Patel took a deep breath. Sophia has a rare genetic condition. It's causing her kidneys to fail. Victoria gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. But she's always been so healthy. How did we miss this? These conditions can remain dormant for years, Dr. Patel explained gently. The good news is we've caught it relatively early. With proper treatment and potentially a transplant, Sophia has a good chance at a full recovery. The word transplant hung in the air, heavy with implication. A transplant? Elena asked, her lawyer's mind already racing. What does that entail? As Dr. Patel outlined the process, the risks, and the search for a compatible donor, Marcus felt the world tilting on its axis. His daughter, his beautiful, vivacious Sophia, needed a kidney, and he, her father, might not be able to give her one. We'll need to test all of you for compatibility, Dr. Patel was saying. Siblings are often the best match, so we should test Alexander as well. Victoria nodded, her face set with determination. Whatever it takes, we'll do anything. As they left the consultation room, the weight of the situation settling over them, they found Catherine and Alexander waiting in the hallway. The boy's face lit up at the sight of them, then fell as he registered their expressions. "Is Sophia okay?" he asked, his voice small and frightened. Marcus knelt down, pulling his son into a tight embrace. "Sophia's very sick, buddy, but the doctors are doing everything they can to make her better." Alexander's lower lip trembled. "Can I see her?" Elena stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Alexander's shoulder. "Soon, sweetheart. But first, we need to talk to you about something important. Something you might be able to do to help your sister." As they explained the situation to Alexander in terms an 8-year-old could understand, Marcus watched his son's face. He saw fear, confusion, and then something else, a fierce determination that reminded him so much of Victoria. "I'll do it," Alexander said firmly. "I'll give Sophia my kidney if she needs it." The adults exchanged glances, a mix of pride and heartbreak in their eyes. "It's not that simple, darling," Victoria said gently. "We need to run some tests first. And even then, it's a big decision. One we all need to think about very carefully." As they made their way to Sophia's room, Marcus felt a strange calm settle over him. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. But looking at his family, Victoria's unwavering strength, Elena's steadfast support, Alexander's bravery, and the thought of Sophia fighting for her life, he knew they would face it together. Standing outside Sophia's room, preparing to see their little girl hooked up to machines, Marcus took a deep breath. He felt Victoria's hand slip into his on one side, Elena's on the other. Alexander stood between them, small but resolute. "Ready?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. They nodded, united in their love for Sophia and their determination to see her through this. As they stepped into the room, the beeping of monitors a stark reminder of the battle ahead. Marcus realized that this messy, complicated, beautiful family was the strongest force he'd ever known. And together they would fight for Sophia with everything they had. The door closed behind them, shutting out the world and enclosing them in a bubble of love, fear, and hope. Whatever came next, they would face it as one. Victoria paced nearby, her usual grace replaced by nervous energy. "It's been hours," she murmured, glancing at her watch for the 100th time. "Shouldn't we have heard something by now?" Elena, who had been quietly working on her laptop, looked up with a sympathetic smile. "These procedures take time. No news is good news. Remember?" Marcus nodded absently, his mind replaying the events that had led them here. The endless tests, the anxious wait for results, and finally, the bittersweet relief when Alexander was declared a match. His son's bravery in the face of such a monumental decision still left him in awe. "He shouldn't have had to make that choice," Marcus said suddenly, his voice hoarse with emotion. "He's just a child." Victoria stopped pacing, moving to sit beside him. She took his hand, her touch a lifeline in the storm of his thoughts. "Alexander made his own decision, Marcus. We gave him all the information, all the support. He chose to help his sister." "She's right," Elena added, closing her laptop and joining them. "That boy has a heart of gold, just like his father." Before Marcus could respond, the operating room door swung open. Dr. Patel emerged, her surgical mask pulled down to reveal a tired but satisfied smile. "Mr. Bennett, Miss Blackwood," she began, addressing them all. "The surgery was successful. Both Sophia and Alexander are doing well." A collective sigh of relief filled the hallway. Victoria burst into tears, burying her face in Marcus's shoulder. Elena squeezed Marcus's other hand, her own eyes glistening. "When can we see them?" Marcus asked, his voice thick with emotion. "They're being moved to recovery now. You can see them shortly, but remember, they need rest. Especially Sophia. The next 24 hours are critical for monitoring rejection." As Dr. Patel left to oversee the post-op care, the reality of what they'd just been through began to sink in. Their children, their babies, had just undergone major surgery. The danger wasn't completely past, but they'd cleared a massive hurdle. "I need some air," Marcus said suddenly, standing up. "I'll be right back." He made his way to a small courtyard outside the hospital, the cool night air a shock to his system. Leaning against a tree, he finally allowed himself to break down, sobs racking his body as the stress of the past weeks poured out of him. "Marcus!" Elena's soft voice came from behind him. "Are you okay?" He turned, hastily wiping his eyes. "I'm fine, But Elena shook her head, cutting him off. "You don't have to be strong all the time, you know? Not with me. Not with any of us." And just like that, the walls came crumbling down. Marcus found himself enveloped in Elena's embrace, crying into the shoulder of the woman he'd once hurt so deeply. "I was so scared," he admitted between sobs. "I still am. What if something goes wrong? What if Sophia rejects the kidney? What if Alexander has complications?" Elena held him tighter, her own tears falling silently. "Then we'll face it together. All of us. That's what family does." As they stood there in the quiet courtyard, Marcus felt a shift in his relationship with Elena. The last vestiges of awkwardness and resentment seemed to melt away, replaced by a deep, abiding friendship forged in the fires of this shared ordeal. Victoria's voice called out softly, "Marcus? Elena? They're ready for us to see the kids." They broke apart, sharing a look of understanding before heading back inside. Victoria's eyes were red-rimmed but clear, her posture straight and determined. She reached for Marcus's hand as they approached the recovery room. "Ready?" she asked, echoing the question they'd asked each other so many times over the past weeks. Marcus nodded, drawing strength from the two incredible women beside him. As they pushed open the door, the sight that greeted them nearly brought him to his knees. Sophia and Alexander lay in adjacent beds, pale but peaceful. Machines beeped softly, monitoring their vital signs. Despite the tubes and bandages, they looked like sleeping angels. Marcus moved to stand between the beds, one hand on each child's. Victoria and Elena flanked him, completing their unconventional family circle. "We did it," Victoria whispered, her voice filled with wonder and relief. "They're going to be okay." As they stood vigil over their sleeping children, Marcus felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. For the miracles of modern medicine, yes, but more importantly, for the incredible family he'd found himself a part of. This journey was far from over. There would be challenges ahead: recovery, medication, the ongoing management of Sophia's condition. But as Marcus looked at Victoria, then Elena, then back to his children, he knew with absolute certainty that they could handle anything life threw their way. The night stretched on, full of quiet conversation and shared hopes for the future. And as the first light of dawn began to creep through the hospital windows, it brought with it the promise of new beginnings and the unbreakable bonds of a family redefined by love, forgiveness, and unwavering support. Marcus stood in the kitchen, surveying the scene before him with a mixture of joy and disbelief. Sophia, her color restored and energy boundless, was chasing Alexander around the living room, their laughter echoing off the walls. Victoria was arranging a platter of snacks, while Elena chatted with Catherine as they hung a welcome home banner. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Victoria's voice broke through his reverie as she sidled up next to him. Marcus wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. "Just marveling at all of this, at how far we've come." Victoria leaned into him, her eyes following his gaze to their children. "It's pretty incredible, isn't it? Sometimes I have to pinch myself to believe it's real." Their moment was interrupted by the doorbell. Elena moved to answer it, revealing Dr. Patel on the other side. "Doctor," Sophia exclaimed, running to greet her. "You came." Dr. Patel knelt down, embracing the little girl. "Of course I did. I wouldn't miss this for the world." As more guests arrived, friends, family, hospital staff who had become like family, the house filled with the warmth of celebration and gratitude. Marcus clinked a glass, calling for everyone's attention. "If I could have a moment," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "I want to thank you all for being here today. These past 6 months have been, well, there aren't really words to describe them." He paused, looking at Sophia and Alexander, who stood hand in hand, watching him intently. "But through it all, we've been surrounded by love and support. From our incredible medical team," he nodded to Dr. Patel, "to our friends and family who never left our side." Victoria stepped forward, taking Marcus's hand. "We especially want to thank our amazing children," she said, her eyes glistening. "Sophia, for her strength and resilience, and Alexander, for his bravery and selflessness." Elena joined them, completing their unconventional family unit. "And to each other," she added, surprising everyone, "for proving that family isn't defined by blood or convention, but by love and commitment." As applause filled the room, Marcus felt overwhelmed by the journey they'd been through. He caught Elena's eye, seeing in her gaze a reflection of his own emotions, gratitude, relief, and a deep, abiding love for the family they'd created. Later, as the party wound down and guests began to depart, Marcus found himself on the back porch, watching the sunset over the ocean. Alexander appeared beside him, leaning against the railing. "Dad?" he asked, his voice small but determined. Do you think Mom and Sophia and I could move in with you? Permanently?" Marcus's heart skipped a beat. He and Victoria had been discussing this very topic, but they hadn't broached it with the children yet. "Is that something you'd want, buddy?" he asked carefully. Alexander nodded vigorously. "Yeah, I mean, we're already together all the time anyway, and I like having you around. All the time." Emotion welled up in Marcus's throat. "I'd like that too, son. Very much." "What about Aunt Elena?" Alexander asked, surprising Marcus with his perceptiveness. "Would she still be around?" Before Marcus could answer, Elena's voice came from behind them. "I'll always be around, sweetheart. No matter what." She joined them at the railing, ruffling Alexander's hair affectionately. "Your dad and I may not be married anymore, but we're still family. All of us." Victoria appeared in the doorway, Sophia perched on her hip. "What's this secret meeting about?" she asked teasingly. As Alexander excitedly shared his idea with his mother and sister, Marcus watched the faces of the people he loved most in the world. Victoria's eyes met his, a question in their depths. He nodded almost imperceptibly, seeing the joy bloom across her features. "Well," Victoria said, her voice trembling slightly, "I think that sounds like a wonderful idea. What do you think, Sophia?" The little girl nodded enthusiastically. "Can we, Daddy? Can we all live together?" Marcus looked at Elena, silently asking for her blessing. She smiled, a bittersweet but genuine expression. "I think it's about time," she said softly. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Marcus gathered his family close. This wasn't the life he'd imagined for himself all those years ago, but standing here, surrounded by love in all its complex, messy, beautiful forms, he knew it was exactly where he was meant to be. "Yes," he said, his voice filled with certainty and joy. "Let's do it. Let's make it official." As cheers and hugs erupted around him, Marcus felt a sense of peace settle over him. The road ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges, but together, they could face anything. This unconventional, extraordinary family had weathered the storm and come out stronger on the other side. The future stretched out before them, full of promise and possibility. And as night fell on their celebration of life and love, Marcus knew that the best was yet to come. Victoria emerged from the house, her face flushed with exertion and excitement. "The kids are fighting over which rooms they want," she said, a hint of amusement in her voice. I think we might need a referee. Marcus chuckled, wrapping an arm around her waist. I'll go play peacekeeper. Where's Elena? Still organizing the library. You know how she gets with her books. As if on cue, Elena appeared in the doorway, her hair pulled.